unity of Godhead. So Narad Muni, as we see over here, is also he's kind of breaking the allegory progressively, right? So here he's, at one point he's talking about Puranjan being absorbed in enjoyment with his wife. And then he also says that Puranjan is neglecting Atma Gyan and Bhagavad Gyan. So this is a point that is as much applicable to Puranjan as it is to Maharaj Prachina Bharishad. Right? Because there was no past mention in the allegory of Puranjan wanting to make spiritual advancement. It was essentially Puranjan looking for a city to live in, and invited by his queen, he goes to the city and starts living there. Narad Muni is now introducing the notion of spiritual perfection, and Puranjan will eventually also traverse that path. So underlying message here, so when it is said that Puranjan, absorbed in his wife, neglected his own ultimate welfare, so Nijam Param, Nijam is his own personal welfare, it works both for the allegorical story as well as for the message to the jiva, that the jiva, absorbed in the enjoyment that is provided by material intelligence, neglects the need for spiritual advancement. And Puranjan is described as Unnatamado Mahamana. Mahamana means one with great intelligence, but Unnatamado, but the fact that he is completely bewildered. So this points to the fact that the jiva is actually Sat Chetana. Sat means that knows everything, but still he is Unnat Madhu. So by nature, the spirit soul is Mahamana. It knows everything, because that's the nature of the spirit soul. But Unnat Madhu, it chooses to go under the influence of material intelligence and forget. So an example that is given is, like, supposing a person is suffering from malaria, and he is typically given two medicines. He's given paracetamol and chloroquine. So one of the medicine, the paracetamol, is to suppress fever. One of the things that happens with malaria is very high fever. So paracetamol suppresses the fever, and chloroquine, it essentially goes into the blood and fights against the parasites that cause malaria. So just working to suppress the fever is an incomplete cure, because as long as the infection for the malaria will remain, the disease will keep coming back again and again. So the real cure is to approach on both fronts, because the fever tends to agitate. One is to suppress the fever, and also to take care of it causally. So similarly, when the jiva is under the mode of goodness, it is like taking only the fever suppressant, because in the mode of goodness, the manifest suffering from the material worlds are greatly reduced. But the underlying reason why the jiva is in the material world is not alleviated. So the person may not have fever, but he will continue to suffer from the disease, and eventually the fever will manifest. So here we see that Puranjan, he is enjoying with his wife piously. He made the determination that his wife represents dharmic intelligence. So he is enjoying with his wife piously. So there is no apparent suffering. But as we will see later on, that because at a root level he is still sick, he will have to ultimately suffer. Prabhupada speaks about the external storyline. He says that thinking of a woman always within one's heart is tantamount to lying down with a woman on a valuable bedstead. The heart is the bedstead, and it is the most valuable bedstead. When a man thinks of woman and money, he lies down and rests on the arms of his beloved woman or wife. In this way, overindulgence is in sex life. So Prabhupada basically talks about what does the metaphor of lying down on the arms of his wife means. That considering the fact that the heart is the bedstead, and when the person lies down, then essentially it means that he is always thinking about sex and money. And solution to that, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it is said that if one associates with the Mahatmas, then his path of liberation is open. However, if the person is too much attached to women or to persons who are attached to women, that is attached to women directly or indirectly, he opens Tamodvaram, the door to the darkest region of hellish life. In the commenting on this verse, Vishwanath Chakravarti, he translates Mahaman as giving in charity. Right? So essentially he translates Mahaman to activities performed in Karmakanda. So he says the spiritual meaning is that because of association with his wife, who represents dharmic intelligence, he became too attached to the principles of dharma. And that became his goal of life rather than liberation. Because he did not know himself as a jiva and did not know the Lord. He became engrossed in unnada ada, in the principles of dharma, and thought of performing mahamana, thought of performing charity. He slept on a valuable bed, which means that he performed pious acts, and he made a pillow of his wife's arm, which meant that he was covered by ignorance. Right? So ignorance, of course, here is ignorance of the real purpose of life. It's not tamogun, but it's still satogun, but it is spiritual ignorance. So in one of his books, Shivaram Swami mentions that, and he's essentially quoting Madhuri Kadamini, that anarthas come from 4 sources. They come from pious activities, impious activities, from seva prad, which is mistakes in the practice of bhakti, and Vaishnava prad. So the people who are altruistic, charitable by nature, they actually confuse pious activities with spiritual activities. They say Manav Seva is Madhav Seva. So what happens is, because of the attachment to pious activities, it produces obstacles on the path of bhakti. Now the difference is that impious activities, they produce temporary misery, and pious activities produce temporary happiness. But at the end of the day, both of them, they create anarthas. They both create obstacles in the path of bhakti. So Prabhupada would say that all karma is bad karma. And that's why Srila Prabhupada, he did not want ISKCON to become a charitable philanthropic organization, because that would confuse the others about the purpose of ISKCON, and most importantly, it could confuse the devotees. So he considered that the performance of pious activities would basically create anarthas that would become obstacles to bhakti. So he only encouraged philanthropic activities where it can be used as a tool to spread Krishna consciousness. Right? Otherwise, he said that philanthropy is like an endless tunnel because the nature of the material world is dukhalayam. So Prabhupada in the purport says that the first step of self-realization is to know oneself as the spirit soul apart from the body. The second stage is one comes to know that every soul, every individual living entity is part of the Paramatma. So Vishwanath Chakravarti, he comments on, so this verse talks about the attraction between Puranjan and his wife. So he talks about the 10 stages of attraction of a man to a woman. And it could be vice versa. Actually, when he comments on it, this comes in the 10th canto when the ladies of Mathura are seeing Krishna. And Vishwanath Chakravarti then talks about, there's one that comes in the first canto also. It also comes in the 10th canto. So this commentary is in the 10th canto that he says there are 10 stages. The first is Chakshurag. Chakshurag means the first attachment comes by the eyes, by seeing. Then Chitta Sangha. Then the next, the attachment intensified in the mind. The person constantly thinks about the other partner. Sankalpa is determination. So this attachment becomes fixed. Then Nidra Cheda. Nidra Cheda is loss of sleep. Then Tanutha. Tanutha is loss of health. Then Vishaya Nivritti. That the person loses interest in all other things other than the object of attraction. Seventh is Kripanash. Kripanash means the person becomes shameless. Then ninth is Unmad. Unmad means being mad after the object. The person essentially becomes completely bewildered. Ninth is Murcha, which is being stunned or unconscious, and 10th is Mrityu, which is death. So Vishwanath Chakravarti says that while these happen in mundane attachment, they also happen in the attachment of a devotee towards Krishna, except that the 10th stage does not appear. Mrityu does not happen. It is replaced by liberation. But the same stages of Chakshurag, attachment by seeing Krishna or his deity form, Chitta Sangha, one begins to think of Krishna, Sankalp, one becomes determined, Nidra Cheda, one becomes absorbed in thinking of Krishna, so is unable to sleep, and so on. Okay, moving on to the next verse. Tayevam ramamanasya kamakashmal chetashaha Shanadam Ivarajendra Vyati Krantam Navam Vayaha. My dear King Prachina Barishat, in this way King Puranjan, with his heart full of lust and sinful reactions, began to enjoy sex with his wife. And in this way, his new life and youth expired in half a moment. Right? So Narad Muni says that his youth expired in half a moment. Prabhupada quotes the famous bhajan by Govindas, Bhajau Reman, Sri Nandanandan. So he talks about how the different senses, they get attracted to different objects. Now, animals, by their innate nature, they are restricted. They have much more sense control than the humans. So you will not see the animals hoarding more than what they need. Most of the animals don't even hoard. They eat whatever they need, and then when they're hungry again, they eat again. There are some animals that hoard, but they will only hoard as much as they need. Then animals will have sex only to procreate. They will defend only when they are threatened. Humans, however, they have this ability to enjoy unrestrictedly. But with this privilege comes the restrictions from the Vedas. Because the human life is an elevated form. So just like the demigods, they have the ability to enjoy a lot more than the humans can. By virtue of their past karma, similarly, the humans can enjoy much more than the animals. But with this privilege, the Vedas also comes with restrictions, which if they do not follow, then actually it is said that they are worse than animals. Because at least the animals, they are honoring this Ishavasyam system, that they are only taking what they need. Now, they may not consider that everything else belongs to Krishna, but they only take what they need. If the humans are not even able to do that, they are worse than animals. Sometimes we see in the Bhagavatam, you'll see that the humans are compared favorably to the Devas, even though the Devas are superior. So same, just like the humans can enjoy more than animals, the Devas can enjoy more than the humans. And just like the humans can misuse that privilege, the Devas can also misuse that privilege. Which is why sometimes the Devas say that we are so much engrossed in all the facilities for enjoyment that we are not able to make spiritual advancement. So we hope to take birth in the Earth planet as human. So the animals, because they are strictly following the rules set by Krishna, they are continuously getting higher births, and all the way till the human form. But when the humans do not follow, they fall down. The animals can never fall down. They will always get a birth higher than the previous birth because they are following the Vedic injunctions. But when the humans, they have the ability to follow or not follow. When they choose not to follow, they can fall down. Just like the Devas, they can also fall down. So then pleasure from sense gratification, it comes fast but does not last. And the pleasure from spiritual advancement does not come fast, but it lasts. So in 522, Yehi samparshajab hoga dukhayo naivata, that the pleasure from sense gratification has a beginning and an end. Right? Sometimes it is compared to a wet cloth. That if there is a wet cloth and you squeeze it, initially you'll get a lot of water from it. But as you continue to squeeze it, the water that comes out of it reduces. Right? So this is the principle of the material world. In economics, it's known as the law of diminishing returns. So when Krishna talks about the material existence as dukkha yona evate, he's basically saying that these material pleasures, they are actually the womb for future sufferings. They give birth to future suffering. So just like when a baby is conceived, it is initially invisible. But in due times, it will certainly manifest itself. So similarly, the suffering that is embedded in material pleasure may be initially invisible, but in due time, it will certainly manifest. That is why Krishna says that an intelligent person does not take part in this enjoyment that comes by samparshajab hoga, by the connection between the sense and the sense object. And in the so this is 522. In 523, Krishna basically then gives the answer of what should be done. And he says that a person should simply tolerate. What should he tolerate? Tolerate the desire to enjoy by the engagement of the sense and the objects. So how long to tolerate? Krishna says until death, which means forever. So, and then Arjun, implicit Arjun says very difficult. So Krishna says not really. He says that you can tolerate it if you enjoy from within. So another analogy to understand it is that when a person is walking in the sun, the shadow may appear much larger than the object. That's the nature of sense enjoyment, especially sex enjoyment. That it the shadow that it casts, the expectation that comes out of it is much more than the substance. So it is said that small objects cast big shadows when the sun is setting. So similarly, when one's intelligence is setting, then small material pleasures, they cast big shadows. And the more the intelligence is setting, the larger the shadow is. But the Vedas, they help the person in making the distinction between substance and shadow. Now, the Karmakand portion of the Vedas, they are steering the person more and more towards the shadows. They're basically more steering the person towards sense enjoyment. For instance, the Vedas recommend polygamy. They don't recommend, but they support polygamy. Why do they support polygamy? Because it allows for the man to enjoy all the time. So if one of his wife is not ready to satisfy him, he goes to the second. The second wife may be pregnant, he goes to the third wife. So it basically allows for unrestricted sense enjoyment. So while it is, according to the Vedas, it's not sinful, but in a way it is worse than impiety because it conditions the person to material enjoyment. So Chaitanya Charan Prabhu, in one of his lectures, he notes that that life is like a chess game. When the person is constantly playing moves to win more health and wealth and happiness, and the opponent on the other side of the chessboard is time, and invariably wins. The opponent will invariably do the checkmate. So, and then this is more him being humorous. He says, in order to avoid checkmate, best is not to mate. So the famous philosopher Freud, he describes the mind as a pressure cooker, and if there is no release, then it will explode. So that's why Freud talks about the need to have to indulge in sex to release the pressure in the mind. The Vedas, however, describe the mind as a child that can be trained. So Devamrita Swami, he says that the materialists call the spiritualist as evolution denier or intelligent designer acolytes or religious fanatics, whereas the spiritualists accuse the materialist as suffering from biologism, which is another way of saying that life is made from chemicals. So Prabhupada summarizes this by saying that time and tide waits for no man. The span of the youth expires very quickly. He says, Kama Kashmal Cheshtasha indicates that unrestricted sense enjoyment is not allowed in the human form of life. Okay, so this was the end of the section that talks about the enjoyment of King Puranjan with his queen. The next section will deal with the repercussions of it. The verse 6. Tasyam ajanayet putran puranjanyam puranjanaha shatanyeka dashavira ayushordam athatagya. The great sage Narad, then addressing King Prachinabarishad, addressed King Prachinabarishad, O one whose lifespan is great, Virat. In this way, King Puranjan begot 1100 sons within the womb of his wife, Puranjani. However, in this business, he passed away half of his lifespan. So these seven verses from 6 to 12 talks about Puranjan's family and old age. So previously it was mentioned that the Puranjan's youth passed away in half a moment. And here it is talked, he just said that he passed away half of his lifespan. So this is just the difference between actualities and perception. And when one is very much absorbed in material enjoyment, or any kind of enjoyment, even spiritual enjoyment, then time passes very quickly. So Puranjan was so much involved in enjoying with his queen that half of his life passed away in half a moment. So he had 1100 sons, and in the next verse it will be said that he has 110 daughters. So Prabhupada notes, he talks about the fact that so many children. He says that people in the age of Kali follow contraception that is against nature. Even the Vedic method of having sex only in the days following the woman's period is natural contraception and is not ideal, though not as bad as artificially following it. It is essentially a concession. Real contraception is following restraint or having children only to further spirituality. Prabhupada says if a man is in good consciousness, he consults with his religious wife, and as a result of this consultation with intelligence, one advances in his ability to estimate the value of life. In other words, if one is fortunate enough to have a good, conscientious wife, he can decide by mutual consultation that human life is meant for advancing in Krishna consciousness. Children are known as parinam, or byproducts, and one consults his good intelligence. He can see that his byproduct should be the expansion of his Krishna consciousness. We'll talk about the principle of a Krishna conscious Grahastha life. Verse 7. Duhitra dashotra shatam pitramatra yashasrika shilodarya gunopeta pauranjaya prajapate. O Prajapati, King Prachinabarishad, in this way King Puranjan also begot 110 daughters. All of these were equally glorified like the father and mother. Their behavior was gentle, and they possessed magnanimity and other good qualities. So Vishwanath Chakravarti says that the daughters represent qualities like shame and enthusiasm and thoughtfulness. And then he says the fact that the number of sons were more than the number of daughters indicates that the household is a pious household. So he says that a symptom of piety in a household is when there are more boys than girls in the in the offsprings. So the daughters had good qualities because of the previous pious acts. Because they were daughters, they are called Puranjanya. So Srila Prabhupada also notes that having qualified children, Shil or Darya Gunopeta, is a symptom of piety. That the children were not a result of Varna Sankar. So Puranjan was begetting children with his wife while staying in the realm of Dharma. Prabhupada also notes that having more sons than daughters, it increases the comfort level of family life. In a commentary in the 7th canto of the Bhagavatam, Prabhupada writes about Varna Sankar. He says that when there is Varna Sankar, population, irrespective of external controls or legislative assemblies, cannot be expected to act properly. In the purport to this verse, Prabhupada says that too much enjoyment of any of the senses, and not just sexual enjoyment, but any enjoyment, any of the senses, it results in sinful activities. And therefore, one should become a Swami or a Goswami at the end of his life. One may beget children up to the age of 50, but after 50, one must stop and should accept the Vanaprastha. And later on, become a sannyasi. Prabhupada says that sannyasi is also a Goswami, which means that he is completely refrained from sense enjoyment. One should not accept the sannyas order whimsically. He must be fully confident that he can restrain his desires for sense gratification. King Puranjan's family life was, of course, very happy. As mentioned in this verses, he begot 1100 sons and 110 daughters. Everyone desires to have more sons than daughters, and since the number of daughters were less than the number of sons, it appears that King Puranjan's family life was very comfortable and pleasing. Okay, verse 8. Sapanchal-patihi putran pitravam shavivardhanan dhara samyojayamasha duhitra sadasharah varahi. After this, King Puranjan, king of the Panchal country, in order to increase the descendant of his paternal family, married his sons with qualified wives and married his daughters with qualified husbands. The Prabhupada says that according to the Vedic system, everyone should marry. One has to accept a wife because a wife will produce children, and children will in turn offer foodstuffs and funeral ceremonies so that the forefathers may be happy, which is essentially what Arjuna talks about in a negative way in Varna Sankar. If the children are not qualified, then the offering to the ancestors cease. So Prabhupada gives 3 responsibilities in his purport of the parents towards the children, and this is again Kan part. He said that just like the parents have enjoyed sex life, they should make similar arrangements for the children. And second, he says is that qualified husbands indicate that care must be taken in making these arrangements. So the arrangements for the marriage should be done with lot of thought. And third responsibility says is that sons and daughters should not be allowed freedom to intermingle with the opposite sex unless they are married. Right? And he says that unfortunately in this age, although the father and mothers are anxious to get their children married, the children refuse to get married by the arrangement of the parents. Consequently, the number of Varna Sankar has increased throughout the world under different names. Okay, next verse. Putranam cha bhavam putra ekaksya shatam shatam yervai puranjano vamsa panchaleshu sameditaha. Of these many sons, each produced hundreds and hundreds of grandsons. In this way, the whole city of Panchal became overcrowded by the sons and grandsons of King Puranjan. So Prabhupada explains this metaphor in the purport. He says that these unlimited descendants of Puranjan are the result of his enjoying with his wife in the city of 9 gates. So here it is called Panchal. So Panchal refers to the five sense objects. So another name for the body is also one that has, not the 5 sense objects, the 5 senses, that has the 5 senses. So the sons and the daughters and the grandsons and the great-grandchildren, they all essentially represent the infinite actions and the reactions to the activities of the jiva. So we see that Puranjan is combining with his wife to produce his descendants, and so on. The descendants are descendants. Similarly, the jiva, under the influence of the material intelligence, performs hundreds and thousands of activities. And then these activities, they have their own reaction. And in this way, the activities create more activities. The sons creating more grandsons. So the body of the jiva is essentially overwhelmed with these activities. Right? So in the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna is asked by Arjuna what is karma, he says that those activities that result in the creation of a material body. So each and every molecule that is there in the material body is the result of some karma that has been performed at some point of time. Which is why it is said that when finally the jiva becomes akarma, the material body automatically dissolves because it has no basis to exist. So Prabhupada says that we must remember that Puranjan is the living entity and the city Panchal is the body. The body is the field of activity for the living entity. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita, Kshetra and Kshetragya. Right? So Kshetra is the body and Kshetragya is the living entity. Right? So and Prabhupada then describes that the body is made out of the Panchadesh. So here he talks about the 5 sense objects: earth, water, fire, air, and ether. So, and then he says that every living entity creates actions and reactions, which are herein known allegorically as sons and grandsons. So there are 2 kinds of action and reactions, pious and impious. In this way, our material existence becomes coated by different actions and reactions. So sometimes we see that when people are heavily intoxicated, they will behave in an irrational way. But when the effect of that intoxication goes away, then they will apologize that I'm sorry I acted in this way. Similarly, when the jiva is conditioned, then he acts completely on a bodily platform. So Prabhupada notes that with a little bit of introspection and by hearing the Vedas, one can at least recognize that he is in an intoxicated state. Right? He quotes Denosmin Yathade, and one way of understanding that you're not the body is you listen to what the Vedas say and introspect. And then you can understand that I'm not the bodies. So when the jivas understand they're not the bodies, then just like when an intoxicated person becomes sober, he regrets his activity, apologizes. Similarly, the jiva regrets his material activity and begins to rectify it. And Prabhupada said, those who are not able to do that, by Prahlad Maharaj, such people are known as Grahami. Goes from the 7th canto of the Bhagavatam. The Prahlad Maharaj says that those who just remain in Maithunadi, Sukham Hitucham, they are Grahami. Okay. We'll do one more verse and then stop for any discussion. Teshu tadrik tahareshu grahakosha jivishu nirudhena mamatvena vishayeshva anvabhadyata. These sons and grandsons were virtual plunderers of King Puranjan's riches, including his home treasury, servants, secretaries, and all other paraphernalias. Puranjan's attachment for these things was very deep-rooted. So again, this is a theme that is often repeated in the scriptures, that the family members are considered as Swajan Dasyu. So Dasyu means bandits, and Swajan means that they are your own. Swajan is family members. And so bandits in the form of family members. So in this forest of material existence, so just like when a person is going through the forest, he can get plundered by the bandits. So similarly, in this forest of the material world, the most dangerous bandits are those that are closest to the person, Swajandasya. So really speaking, there is no protection from them. So it indicates how dangerous the material world is. And the only way to address this danger is by considering that the self is the servant of Krishna, the family is the servant to Krishna. So everyone then gets transferred from plunderers to well-wishers. So in a wider perspective, Prabhupada notes that the materialistic people have their wealth plundered because they themselves are plunderers. So he talks about the law of karma, that what you do happens to you, because the materialist people are stealing the wealth of Krishna. There was this conversation with Dr. Patel in Bombay when Prabhupada was making the same statement, that if you're using the wealth of Krishna, and Dr. Patel actually, he said you're a thief, and Dr. Patel actually became very, very upset about it. And he said, yeah, but I do so much of philanthropy. And then Prabhupada laughed and said that, so you're a small thief, but nevertheless you're a thief. So because one is stealing from Krishna, one's own wealth gets stolen. This is essentially the principle of material existence, that without Krishna in the center, everything that you get will be temporary. That's the law of karma. And the people are so blinded by the modes that despite knowing this, they continue to steal and enjoy, even when their own wealth is being stolen. So it's not that it's happening in stages. That while they are stealing, their wealth is being stolen. But the modes are so strong that they are not able to make this connection. Prabhupada quotes from 16th chapter, 3 verses, where Krishna says, the nature of the demoniac person is, so much wealth I have, so much more I will get, and so much is mine and my enemy. I have killed him and my other enemies will be killed. I am the Lord. I am the enjoyer, aham bhogi. So just the whole I, me, mine mentality of the demoniac. Okay, so let me pause here and see if there's any discussion.
Prabhu, just a question about, like we have teachings of Lord Kapila or Queen Kunti's prayer like that. Is there a BBT book just on this allegory? It's a nice thing to do actually, because so it's a very good outreach, because it touches the life of everyone, right? So it's a beautiful way of reaching out also. I was just thinking.
You're right. The allegory is very powerful. As far as I know, I haven't come across any book on this topic. Maybe you should write one, Prabhu. Okay, so no more questions, then we can move on to the verse 11. Ije cha kratubhir ghore dikshita pashumak marke devan pitran bhutapatin nana kama yatha bhavan. The great sage Narad continued, my dear King Prachina Barishat, like you, King Puranjan also became implicated in so many desires. Thus he worshipped demigods, forefathers, and social leaders with various sacrifices, which were all very ghastly because they were inspired by the desire to kill animals. So now, Narad Muni for the first time is openly disclosing that King Puranjan is actually King Prachinabarisa. He says, like you, he says, and implicitly he's telling that the purpose of this allegorical story is to instruct him. Now, even though Narad Muni has revealed at this point, but he will continue with the allegory for until the end of the next chapter. But as we see that initially he was bringing in a subtle way, now he openly reveals that actually you are Puranjan. So one thing, and this is a general observation, that when we are looking at analogies or metaphors, it's very important to understand that they are there to explain a principle. Sometimes devotees become so absorbed in the analogy or trying to explain the analogy that they forget the real purpose of the analogy. So we see that in Prabhupada's purport, that he's always going beyond just the analogy, right? So like Prabhupada is giving practical instructions because of this reason, that he does not want this to be just mental gymnastics, where people look at the metaphors and look at the allegory, they understand what it signifies, and that's success. That's partial success. Success is actually getting the message. For instance, like in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Vasamsi Janani Yatha Vihaya, right? He says that the body is changing garments, a person is changing garments, just like the soul is changing body, right? Now, they may explain that analogy and what it signifies, but what they forget to explain is that Krishna is actually giving this analogy to instill Atmagyan in Arjuna and us, that you're not the body, you're the soul, right? It's not really to explain that a person is changing clothes and whatever it is. That's the hook. The real purpose is that the conditioned soul understands that I am not the body, I am the soul. So in themselves, the analogies and metaphors, they don't hold any spiritual truths, and they don't also extend, right? So when Krishna says that, a person is changing clothes and discards old ones and wears new ones, then somebody might say, but the old discarded garment is still there. And later on, the person may choose to wear that garment. Or in some cases, they may give it in charity to somebody. So does that mean Krishna's analogy breaks? No. The analogy is only determined by the speaker. That the speaker says, this is the message that I want to give with the analogy. One cannot, on their own, one cannot extrapolate it, right? And the reason again is that analogies are just tools. They don't contain any tattva in them. They're using one thing to explain another thing. This is just a technique, right? This saying that the woman is as beautiful as the moon. So since people see the moon and they appreciate its beauty, they can get a sense of how beautiful the woman is. But then somebody can say that, does the face of the woman shrink and grow on a weekly cycle? No. Does that mean the analogy breaks? No. So when we are reading this allegory by Narad Muni, it's important to understand this context, that one only uses it in the context that Narad Muni is providing it. One should not interpolate or extrapolate it. And then one should also understand the real purpose behind this allegory. So the immediate goal of Narad Muni is to stop Puranjan from indiscriminate animal killing in the name of religion. And the ultimate goal is to help Puranjan go back to Godhead. Right? So now Narad Muni is revealing the purpose of the allegory. So generally the pious people, the Vedic karmis, so to speak, they are very much attached to increasing their descendants. And in order to do so, they perform many yagyas. Then the modern day karmis, Prabhupada says they are the scientists who are eager to see that the future karmis live comfortably. And they have invented various ways to exploit nature. That's why it is said that each generation is trying to create prosperity for the subsequent generation. But then Prabhupada says that this ultimately fails because the foundation is incorrect. He says the activities of the modern karmis are centered around meat eating. And this inevitably leads to intoxication and sexual intercourse. All this comes from animal killing, which is ghastly. So a Vaishnavacharya knows that such persons are certain to be involved in the cycle of birth and death. So when we say that Narad Muni wants to stop the killing of animals, his compassion is not just for the animals that are being killed, but also for the people who are killing the animal. So while material compassion is relative in the sense that directed towards one person at the cost of another person, spiritual compassion is all-encompassing. Narad Muni's compassion is as much to Puranjan or Prachinavari as it is to the priests, as it is to his praja, and as it is to the animals. Radhanath Swami, in one of the lectures, he says that there was once a case where there was a dog that was chained to a pole, and people were very much concerned that this dog is chained for a long time to a pole. And ironically, right by that, there was a hot dog. and people, and of course, hot dog is not made out of dog, but they're still animals. So that's the nature of relative compassion. Recently, so in our neighborhood, we have this neighborhood community, virtual community. And then one person was posting very much distressed that she was walking past a farm, and then she had taken pictures of many cows and calves, and she said they look really lean, and they look like they're underfed. And there were many people saying, "Oh, you should complain to the agency, and how can they mistreat animals?" And that compassion is good, but the same people, they're putting these messages in, and then they will go home and they will have beef and pork and chicken, right? So it's basically just incomplete compassion. Whereas Vaishnavas, because they have a Vivasatmika buddhi, Prabhupada says they are fixed in the real purpose of the scriptures. Prabhupada also writes extensively about the need to stop animal killing. And I can summarize the points for you. Most of them are, Prabhupada is speaking, so I think it's important for us to also speak. So Prabhupada says that there are two ways of animal killing. One is in the name of religious sacrifice, and second is for sense gratification. Then religious sacrifice is there to introduce control and restriction to those who are addicted. Then Prabhupada said, in the present day, very few people perform religious sacrifices. Most of the people are addicted to sense gratification, and they kill animals for that. However, both are harmful. Whether the sacrifice is under the name of religion or it is for sense gratification. Prabhupada says that in the 18th chapter, verse 32, Krishna says that those who are influenced by tamoguna, they engage in these activities. And then finally, he makes this point that this is also evidenced by the instructions of Narad to Srila Vyasadeva, when Narad Muni condemns Karma Kanda aspect of the Vedas, and which gives a license to enjoy. So at the present moment, it is a great misfortune that in India, many so-called missionary workers are spreading irreligion in the name of religion. They claim an ordinary being to be God and recommend meat eating for everyone, including so-called sannyasis. So there are, of course, many cases where ordinary human beings in India, they're elevated to the role of God. And Prabhupada was also very critical when he says that there are many so-called missionary workers that are spreading irreligion in the name of religion. He's referring to Mother Teresa. So even though Mother Teresa is considered to be the epitome of charity, Prabhupada was critical of her because she was guiding, she was introducing people to meat eating. When she was feeding those who were hungry, she was introducing them to meat eating. And irreligion in the name of religion, one way is because of guiding them towards eating the flesh of other animals. Also, she was proselytizing very actively. She was converting them into Christianity. Then Prabhupada also talks about so-called sannyasis recommending meat eating. And this is pointing to Vivekananda. Vivekananda, he writes that he strongly recommends eating cow meat. He's saying that the problem with Indians is that they are weak. That's why they are ruled by the Britishers. So they should eat beef, which is very nourishing to the tissues, and that way they can become strong. Similarly, Ramakrishna Paramahansa, Prabhupada was critical Ramakrishna mission, he would call it chicken mission, because they would not really encourage, they actually encourage vegetarianism, but they're very permissive about eating meat. So Prabhupada says that because of this habit of meat eating, Krishna, he incarnates himself as Lord Buddha to put an end to animal killing in the name of religion. Okay, verse 12. Yukteshva evam paramaktasya kutumbasak chetashaha asasada savaikalo yo priya priya yoshitam. Thus King Puranjan, being attached to fruitive activities, karma kandya, as well as kith and kin, and being obsessed with polluted consciousness, eventually arrived at that point not very much liked by those who are overly attached to material things. So Prabhupada says that in this verse, the word priya yositam and apriya are significant. So priya yositam means, so yoshit is woman, priya yositam means is those who are very much attached to woman. So for such people, death is not very welcome, because it obviously, amongst other things, it stops their ability to enjoy. So King Puranjan arrived at the point of old age. In old age, the senses lose their strength, and although an old man desires to enjoy his senses, and especially sex life, is very miserable because his instruments for enjoyment no longer function. Such sensualists are never prepared for death. They simply want to live on and extend their life by so-called scientific advancement. Some foolish Russian scientists also claim that they're going to make man immortal through scientific advancement. Under the leadership of such crazy fellows, civilization is going on. Cruel death, however, comes and takes all of them away, despite the desires to live forever. This type of mentality was exhibited by Hiranyakashipu, but when the time was right, the Lord personally killed him within a second. Prabhupada also gives the story of, we've discussed this in part, that in the past, that there was a sadhu who was traveling and met four kinds of people. To the prince, he says that, may you live forever. To the sage, he says, you may either live or die. To the brahmachari, he says, may you die immediately. And to the hunter, he says, may you neither live nor die. And the reason is because of the nature of activities, that the prince was enjoying sensually, so he says, may you live forever, because after he died, he would suffer. The sage, whether he was living or dying, he was enjoying service to the Lord, so no difference for him. For a brahmachari, he says, may you die immediately, because currently the brahmachari is living a controlled life, which is free of sins. But later on, when he moves to the other ashrams, then he will get absorbed in sense enjoyment. So the sage says, may you die immediately and hopefully go back to God. And then to the hunter, he says, you neither live nor die, because if he lives, he will continue hunting and kill more animals. But if he dies, he will suffer a lot. So either way, not good for him. So Prabhupada gives the story just to give an example that how the material world is a dangerous place, and one way or the other, one suffers. Okay, now let's go on to verse 13. Chanvega iti kyato Gandharvadipate nripa Gandharvastasya balinaha Shashtya Utra Shatrayam. O king, in Gandharv Lok, there is a king named Chandve. Under him, there are 360 very powerful Gandharva soldiers. So in 6 verses from 13 to 18, Narad Muni describes Chandvega and the attacks. So as you can guess, Chandvega is essentially time. So, because time does not wait for anyone, so Vega means very quickly, and Chandveg means one that passes very swiftly. So that's the nature of time. So it is said that he has 360 Gandharva soldiers. And essentially, this is calculated in terms of the number of days in a year. So time is under his control, has 360 soldiers or days. So the nature of time is described as imperceptible yet swift. It's a contradiction. Because if you are in a stream and the water is flowing very swiftly, then it'll be evident that when you put your hand in the water, then the water will splash around. If the water is flowing very, very gently, then it is imperceptible. You may not even know that the water is flowing. But time is described as both, as being imperceptible as well as swift. So the imperceptible is referring to the passing away of the days of the life. So figuratively, it is referring to the Gandharvas. So the reason Narad Muni is using the Gandharvas in this metaphor is that the Gandharvas are considered to be masters of illusion, or they are masters of creating opportunities for sense enjoyment. They can sing very well, dance very well, very pleasing to look at. So this is the impact of time, that it creates the illusion of enjoyment while it is plundering. And this happens right from the beginning. So even though here it is said that Puranjan began to experience it when it was old, but it happens from the day of birth. Right from that time, the Gandharvas are stealing. With every breath, as it is said, one breath closer to death. So right from the beginning, one's Prabhupada says that 3 things are stolen by time: one's name, one's fame, and one's wealth and paraphernalia. So as will be explained in the later verses, that Gandharvas are both male and female. So this indicates that both men and women lose their lifespan imperceptibly by the force of time. Prabhupada quotes 2:317, that both by the rising and setting of sun, the duration of one's life is reduced. So we had discussed that time passes swiftly and imperceptibly. So the days are busy, but the weeks are short. So one gets up in the day and there is so much to do. Right? So time, it looks like you never have enough time to do what you set out to do. Right? So that way one is experiencing the swift nature of time. But then at the same time, the days are becoming weeks and weeks are becoming months and years, and one does not notice that. Right? So that's why this time is considered to be having both the properties of being swift as well as imperceptible. Okay, verse 14. Gandharvyas tadrishirasya maithunyascha shitashitah parivritta Nitya Vilumpanti Sarvakam Vinirmitam. Along with Chanvega were as many female Gandharvis as they were soldiers. All of them respectively plundered all the paraphernalia for sense enjoyment. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Pad comments on this verse. He says that Chand Vega, moving strongly, which is time represented as the year, was the leader of the Gandharvas. There were 360 men and 360 women. The men Gandharvas are the days, the women Gandharvas are the nights. And the nights were paired with the days. The white ones were the waxing phase of the moon, and the black ones are the waning phase of the moon. So Prabhupada notes a little differently. He says that the black ones represent night and the white ones represent the day. But ultimately what it is said, they circle around the city and plundered it, which indicates that right from birth, every day, every moment, one's lifespan is being stolen by time. So the nature of material attachment is that it will always result in the same thing, which is repeated birth and death and ultimate misery. So that's why it is said that the plundering, it happens right from the beginning of one's material life. In the purport, Prabhupada says that whether we squeeze sugar out of the sugar cane with our teeth or a machine, the result is the same, sugar cane juice. And so essentially the point he's making is that we may discover different ways to enjoy, but the result is same, which is repeated birth and death. There may be pious and impious way to enjoy it. There may be ways to enjoy through wealth or by indulgence in sex or through pious activities, but the result will still be the same, which is repeated birth and death. Verse 15. Tyachandvega nucharaha puranjan puram yada artumare bire tatra pratyasheda prajagraha. When King Gandharva Raj Chandvega and his followers began to plunder the city of Puranjan, a snake with 5 hoods began to defend the city. So the 5 hoods of the snake indicate the life waves that are of 5 kinds. Prabhupada gives Pran, Apan, Vyan, Udan, and Saman. So when the body is inactive, then the life waves are active. And Prabhupada says that up to the age of 50, one can actively work for sense gratification, but after the 50th year, one's energy decreases. Although one can work with great strain for 2 or 3 more years, perhaps up to 55 years. Thus, the 55th year is generally taken by government regulations as the final year for retirement. Now it's, I think, more. At least in India, I think it's probably 60 years now. And in the US, at least in the federal government, there is no age for retirement. People work till their 80s. So Vishwanath Chakravarti explains that till the age of 50, the person has some strength. After that, it stays for a few years and then it actively starts diminishing. So when a child grows into a youth, then while his bodily strength is increasing, his lifespan is reducing. So one's birthday, and I was listening once to a lecture, and the person making it's a little morbid. he was saying that one should not celebrate birthdays, one should celebrate death day, because birth has already happened, but it's every year you can use it as a reminder that you're 1 year closer to death. So whether you celebrate it or whether you look at it somberly, but he said it's not really a birthday, it's you're 1 year closer to your end. Okay, verse 16. Sa saptabi shatereko vimatsya cha shatam samaha puranjan puradhyaksho gandhave yuyudhe bali. The five-footed serpent, the superintendent and protector of the city of King Puranjan, fought with the Gandharvas for 100 years. He fought alone and with all of them, although they numbered 720. So the verse talks about the battle of the pran, or the life hairs, with the aging effect of time. As one grows old, the body is weakened. But the fact that it says 100 years means that this battle begins from birth. So 100 years is the typical lifespan of a living entity. Right? So essentially what Nagmani is saying is that as soon as the person is beginning, he begins to die. As soon as the person is born, he begins to die. And it's essentially a battle between the pran, the life hairs, and time. So this is the hard struggle for material existence. The soul never dies and the body always dies. And why does the struggle happen? When the soul comes in contact with the material body. So because the soul never dies, it does not know death. And because the body always dies, it does not know immortality. So when they come together, they're incompatible. And that is why this struggle happens. That the body in connection with the soul tries to become immortal, and the soul in connection with the body tries to come to terms unsuccessfully with the notion of mortality. Right? So Krishna says that Jatasya dhrumatyur dhrum janmamitasya cha tasmata priyarte na tum sochitam adasya. Right? Jatasya dhrumatyur. That one who takes birth is definitely going to die. And one who dies is definitely going to take birth again. Okay, next verse. So after this verse, or maybe we'll do two more verses, 17 and 18. Chapter is actually almost done, but 30 verses. So next, on Wednesday, we should be able to complete this chapter and hopefully start the next chapter. Next chapter is a longer chapter. Verse 17. Kshimane swasambandhe ekasmin baburyuda chintam param jagamrtah sarashtrapura bandhavah. Because he had to fight alone with so many soldiers, all of whom were great warriors, the serpent with 5 hooves became very weak. Seeing that his most intimate person was weakened, King Puranjan and his friends and citizens living within the city all became very anxious. So, as the life hairs fight with the influence of time, the life hairs become weaker and weaker. Prabhupada says that one can resist a powerful enemy for some time, but not all the time. So King Puranjan and his friends and citizens all became very anxious. Right? So the jiva, he cannot do anything regarding the killing effect of time. Now there are yogis who are able to prolong their lives to hundreds and thousands of years. So they work on this principle that one's one has a limited number of breaths in their life. So they control their breathing. And they might take one breath in 6 months. And that way they can extend their life. Now, one might say that they're cheating time. So while they're adding years to their life, they are taking away life from their years. Because while they're controlling their breaths, they are as good as dead. It's not something that one can simply do. One needs to basically be in a position that is like a dead person. So a person comes with a fixed amount of wealth, and the person may exhaust it quickly and enjoy it, or he may be a miser and spend it little by little, and then make it last too long. But then his enjoyment is the same, because the wealth is the same, right? So that is the nature of time. Even the yogis ultimately will die, right? They are not immortal, but they live. They appear to have cheated time. But the point that is made is that they are not cheating time. They are being cheated by time. That they are trying to live a long life, but essentially they are giving up their life in the hopes of living a long life. So Prabhupada in the purport comments that since death begins with birth, one must work to address this right from birth. And he said that people think that religion and piety come at the end of life. And at this time, one generally becomes meditative and takes to so-called yogic processes to relax in the name of meditation. Meditation, however, simply is a farce for those who enjoyed life in sense gratification. As described in the 6th chapter, Dhyan Dharana is a difficult subject matter, for one has to learn from his very youth. To meditate, one must restrain oneself from all kinds of sense gratification. Unfortunately, meditation has now become a fashion, since such meditation is defeated by the struggle for existence. Sometimes such meditative processes pass for transcendental meditation. The Prabhupada here is referring to there was this society, I'm not sure if it's, I think it still exists, there was the Society for Transcendental Meditation. It started in the mid-50s, started by Mahesh Yogi. And at one point it was really, really big, both within India and with the outside. And Prabhupada was critical of it, that how can it be transcendental meditation when, because transcendental means transcendenting to the spiritual level. And apparently what they taught transcendental meditation was a way to calm your mind, to improve your health, and to enjoy. So it was completely anchored onto material aspects. He said, how can it be transcendental? Okay, so let me pause over here and see if there is any discussion.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Now Sanatana analogy about the circle with 5 foot and the years, 360 soul years and 100 years. This is another analogy. This is incredible sometimes to think about how they came up, with all these analogies.
You're right. Nag Muni uses three sets of analogies. So far we were reading about the city of 9 gates and the queen. That was one analogy. The Jiva, King Puranjan living in the city of 9 gates, the body under the influence of the queen, the Jiva. Now this is the second aspect where he talks about 9. He will develop this more later on, about Chandvik and then Kalkanya, the Gandharvas, the whole Kutumb, the whole family he will develop. And then the third analogy that he talks about will come in the next, when he talks about Maladhajva, where he'll talk about the spiritual progress of the Jiva. engaging with the spiritual master, following the rules and regulations. So he breaks it up into these three allegorical stories.
Very interesting.
You're right. Okay, if there is no more comments, we can stop here. Vanchikalpitarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyev cha pratidinam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Ananta Koti Vaishnavind ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thai Gaur Premanand. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.